Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So you guys seem to like doing wrap-ups with me, so here we are again, probably on another long video. But in the month of February, I read 21 books. I don't know what it is about that number, but apparently that's my safe zone, because that's how many I read in January, that's how many I got through in February, and I think that's, in part, thanks to the fact that I read graphic novels and Contemporary-a-thon happened. But like my last video, I'm going to format this where I kind of start with my least liked book of the month and work my way up to my favorite book of the month, rather than going through like chronological order. So that way we are ending on a high note. But that being said, I don't think I read anything that I disliked this month. Like, there was nothing under 3 stars, and in my mind, 3 stars is still a valid recommendation of a book. So I just basically had, like, amazing books, slightly less amazing books that I still want to talk your ear off about. So here we go. So starting with my, I guess, least liked book, even though I still really liked it, but I guess starting at the bottom of the pile, this will make sense because this is a book I technically started in January and I finished in February, so it's fine. It's like a crossover book. I finished Slammed by Colleen Hoover, which is her very first book that she ever wrote, and it shows. Mainly, not to say that this book is bad in any way, but I've just seen her writing evolve over the years, and I started at like her midway point, so I kind of have a high expectation of what her books are going to be like, and this was very clearly a debut novel. That being said, it was still really good. It had all of the like meat that is generally in her stories. We had a swoony romance. This is closer to YA than her adult stuff, so not as much smexy time, which is okay. But we have a romance that generally is hindered by the obstacles of a dark past of one of the love interests in this book. That's kind of what all of her books are like, so we are dealing with some heavy content matter mixed in with some fluff. This one dealt a lot with slam poetry and kind of with grief and death. I feel like a lot of her books generally focus a lot on grief, but this one, it handled it really well. It was very interesting, but it felt very rushed to me. And like I said, it just reads like a debut book, and I have read, like, I don't know, how many books does she have out now? I've read probably like 12 or 13 books beyond this point, and she just progressed as a writer, so this was her starting point. She had to start somewhere, so I gave this 3 stars. The next book that I got to was Roomies by Christina Lauren. This is another author, or authors, it's a pair of writing buddies who write together, that is kind of similar to Colleen Hoover in that they are kind of a go-to reading slump book, or just feel-good fluff book, and this was one that I hadn't gotten to yet, and I knew a lot of people really liked it. It's kind of an arranged relationship situation, like a fake relationship, and I really liked it because our love interest is an Irish boy, so I appreciated that, and I listened to the audiobook, and it was actually a legitimate, like, Irish accent. It wasn't, like, somebody just attempting, so that was appealing. But basically, this follows a girl who is kind of in her, like, transition period going into adulthood. Like, she's done with college, but she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life, so she works at a, orchestral symphony theater type situation that her uncle runs. Her uncle is, like, this famous composer, and she ends up falling madly in love at first sight to this guy who plays in a subway station in her city, and she manages to get this guy to come and audition for her uncle's orchestra, and he is amazing. He blows everybody away, but he is an illegal immigrant from Ireland. He doesn't have his green card, so she ends up marrying him so that he can stay in the States and play his lovely, lovely Irish music. And then the relationship just kind of builds from there, and they hit obstacles, as they always do. I enjoyed it. It was super fun. It was nothing special in my opinion, but it was super enjoyable while I was reading it, so I gave it 3 stars. Then I went back to Colleen Hoover and read All Your Perfects. If you guys want to hear my thoughts on this, go back to my Contemporary-a-thon vlog, because I discuss it more in depth there. But this was a much more recent Colleen Hoover book. I still 3-starred this just because it was not super fun. It was a hard hitter, and I was looking for fun at the time. That's not really how I should rate my books, but it was one of my least liked Colleen Hoover books. So that being said, it was still a 3-star read. It's still a solid read. I still recommend it. Again, I'll leave that vlog linked down below because I kind of talk about it more in there, about like what it's about and whatnot. Next book on this list is Rebel Spring by Morgan Rhodes. This is book 2 of the Fallen Kingdom series. I've been buddy reading through the series with my friend Kayla. I will leave her linked down below. She's adorable. And I have just been working our way through the series. We will be reading book 3 in March. This series is a ride. Like, I had no idea what I was getting into when I picked these books up, but in my opinion, this is very similar to, like, Game of Thrones, but the YA version, because it's pretty brutal. Like, you get thrown right into the politics and the brutal drama that happens in high fantasy when, like, kingdoms are clashing and there's powers being thrown around. It's fun. And for all of you people who have the similar reading taste that I do, this is going to appeal to you because all of the characters are very morally gray. Like, as we're reading about all of them, and as we're starting to get attached to the 4 main characters in this story, I'm pretty sure all 4 of them could technically go either way. Like, they could go super, super evil, or they could, like, save the kingdom. And I honestly couldn't tell you who's going which direction right now, and I love that. So I gave this 3 stars. I didn't love it as much as the first one. I think just because the first one was setting everything up and you just got thrown into the madness. I really liked the, like, learning curve of that. And this one, things are just, like, progressing and it's building, but it wasn't as fun as the first one. So I gave this one 3 stars. Okay, and the next book that I have to talk about is my very first book that we did for my book club, which I will leave linked down below if you guys want to join my book club and read along with me every single month. We're reading mostly backlist books, which is really appealing to a lot of people, myself included. I'm pretty excited about it. But the first series that we started reading together was the Remnant Chronicles. So the first book, obviously, is The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. And this was a blast. There were so many of you guys who were reading this with me, and it was super fun to just, like, discuss it every single day as we were reading. So I gave this 3 stars just because it still had all of the tropiness that old YA fantasy used to have. Like, we have a love triangle, we have some insta-love, we have, like, forbidden magic, and we have, like, runaway princess, like, missing princess. We have all of the tropes that made up old YA fantasy, but honestly, I was here for it the entire time. I just kind of went along for the ride because I feel like I'm not as oversaturated with those tropes as I used to be. And I really enjoyed it. It was super fun. I've heard really good stuff about, like, where the series ends up going. Like, I feel like this, in my opinion, was like Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight era of the series. You know how those 2 books just kind of introduce you to, like, the base characters, you kind of get to know them as people, and then the world just starts expanding from there. I feel like I'm right on the precipice of, like, the world expanding point, so I'm very excited to continue, and I am actually currently listening to book 2, so books 2 and 3 will be on my, I guess, March wrap-up, if you guys are curious. But if you want to join, I will leave it linked down below because we're currently reading books 2 and 3, like, at our own pace. It's been fun. It's been a joy. Okay, moving on to the next book. Okay, and the next 4 books that I have to mention are the first 4 books in the True North series by Serena Bowen. This is an adult romance series that I became obsessed with. I literally listened to these 4 books in, like, 2 days or something. They were all available on the Audible romance package, and I just, like, binged through them, and then all of a sudden books 5 and 6 weren't available to listen to. And I was just like, what do I do? But basically, this series, without going into detail for all of the books, but just know that I averaged these books in between a 3 and a 4-star rating, so we're moving from the 3-star section of this video into the 4-star section of this video with these 4 books. So the first book is called Bittersweet, and it basically introduces you to the Shipley family. And this is a family that owns an apple orchard and a working farm up in Vermont, and it basically follows each of the, like, male figures that are involved in the farm. Like, it follows a couple of brothers, it follows a couple of the farm hands and the workers, and all of their individual romance stories in each book, and I dig series like that. Like, I'm a big fan of romance series that you, like, meet a main character and follow his romance plot, and then the next book we follow, like, his brother's romance plot, and the next one we follow his friend's romance. I don't know why, I just binge through those series like it's my job. So I gave book 1, which is Bittersweet, 3 stars. I gave book 4, which is Bountiful, 3 stars. That one started to lose me because it got away from the farm atmosphere, which was, like, the most appealing part to me because I'm a farm girl. I like reading about farm boys. Those 2 were the 3-star books for me, though. And then books 2 and 3, which is Steadfast and Keepsake, I adored. Like, they were close to 5-star reads because these are the type of books where we know the basic plot of where it's going, but it touched on very important things. It touched on a lot of things like escaping from a cult and religious upbringing and tragic things that happen and, like, overcoming grief. It touched on some heavier stuff, and I really appreciated them as a whole, like, as a standalone story, even though they fit into a series. Okay, I'm gonna move on. This is a series that I got down with big time in February. Okay, moving on into the 4-star reads now. If you guys watched my Contemporary-thon vlogs, you know that I started listening to Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Abib Karam. I've since finished that. I loved this book. It was such a realistic teenage boy story, and it touched on heavier things. It touched on like cultural upbringing, and it touched on depression and mental health and how that's handled in different cultures. It touched on grief and friendship, and it was beautiful, okay? So it basically follows a boy who is Persian, and he is just struggling socially as a whole, as all teenagers do, so we get to like see inside his head, but he struggles mostly like culturally. He was brought up in a very Persian household, and that's not something that was very accepted in his American high school. He's also really nerdy. He really likes tea, which was something that I loved seeing in the book. He also deals heavily with depression, and it touches, I want to say briefly on the depression thing, like it gets brought up. It doesn't really discuss what depression feels like from an inside perspective. It discusses more of like the viewpoints that different cultures have on people with depression and how medicating is viewed in different cultures, which was an interesting thing to see, so I liked that. And he also struggled in his family because he didn't think that his dad respected him because he's a loner, nerdy kid. But the story basically follows him as they go to Iran to see his grandparents because his grandfather has a brain tumor, and it's basically them going to like say goodbye to him. But he kind of finds himself while he's over there. He makes amazing friends, and he like really comes into his own when he discovers like his people. It was beautiful. I gave it 4 stars. I highly recommend it. Next 4-star read that I want to talk about is A Girl Like Her by Talia Hibbert. This was the Dragons and Tea Book Club book for the month of February, which is run by my friends Mel and Amy, and this was precious. This was such a cute February read for like Valentine's Day. It was precious. Basically, this is a very good, diverse romance. That's essentially what it comes down to. It deals with our main character who actually has autism, and she is Black, and our love interest is neither of those things, so it's kind of them overcoming societal views of a relationship interracially and dealing with any sort of mental health awareness when it comes to that. It was handled so well. It was so cute. I read it in like 2 days, and it was precious. I am so glad that they picked this book. They focus mostly on diverse reads, and this was just such a cute, diverse, swoony romance, and it was perfect for February, so I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I have to talk about is Goodbye Days by Jeff Setner. I read this in Contemporary-thon, so again, check out the vlog for my thoughts on this. I obviously gave it 4 stars. I adored this. It was such a hard and emotional read, but it was not as emotional as I was expecting. And I think that's just because you were thrown right into the midst of the tragedy. Like, you don't have a setup to like build emotion. You were just like thrown right in after the tragic event is happening, and you're dealing with the aftermath and how people overcome tragedy. I adored it. It was 4 stars. If you want to hear more thoughts, again, the vlog will be linked down below. The next book I got to is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I know, I'm like the last person in the world to have read this, but I finally just downloaded an audiobook and listened to it in 1 day. It was so freaking cute. I was a puddle after listening to this book. If you guys have read this, you know what it's about. It's obviously an enemies to lovers workspace office environment romance that was just so cute. Like, the entire time I was like just swooning and smiling, and it was precious. I adore me a good enemies to lovers romance, especially with a lot of buildup of sexual tension, which this book delivered. Like, Sally Thorne knows how to write sexual tension to the point where you're like, come on, bring it on, and she brought it on. It was great. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I want to talk about, just because I feel like it fell in the shuffle of the end of the month, beginning of the month filming, because I finished this, I'm pretty sure in January, but I didn't make it into my January wrap-up, depending on when I filmed it. But I want to talk about it because I finished it back then, and it's definitely a 4-star read. It's one of the best books that I've read in a long time, and that is Before She Ignites by Jodi Meadows. This is fantastic. This was recommended to me so many times by so many of you guys, and I get it now. I got it when you told me, but I finally got around to reading it, and now I totally get it. So this has the makings of everything that I would love. It has dragons, which are kind of companion type animals to our main character, and it has anxiety rep. So it's got all of the things that will make me read a book. It was amazing. I gave it 4 stars. Basically, this follows a girl who is kind of this like chosen one pariah type of character, who is the voice of the unity between these islands, like these fallen islands. She's like the spokesperson for the unity of these people. But ultimately, she's really not. Spoiler, the people are not unified, and that's kind of the whole obstacle that the plot has to overcome. Dragons are kind of considered sacred in this book, and she works with them. They are everything from like the big, rideable, huge dragons down to ferret-sized dragons, which is the cutest thing ever. Like, I squealed over that. That was so cute. Basically, something happens, and she gets thrown into the pit, which is a prison situation, and most of this book actually takes place in the prison, and it really focuses on how she has panic attacks, how she uses counting to overcome her panic and her anxiety, and her relationship with the other prisoners as she starts to learn what's happening in the world, how her eyes were kind of covered through a lot of this like political upheaval that's happening, and she's really like discovering what's actually going on in the world. But my favorite thing about this book was her and her relationship with Aru, who is like her prison neighbor, and how they use a language that is essentially just tapping to communicate through everything, which I think really is a love letter to the concept of anxiety and mental health, and how it's really hard to speak up. So this was like a perfect metaphor for what it's like to not be able to have your voice, but be able to still communicate. It was beautiful. This book is so good. If you guys haven't picked it up, it's dragons, it's mental health, it's everything you want. It's so good. I gave it 4 stars. Next book I want to talk about that I gave 4 stars to is Letters to the Lost by Bridget Kemmerer. I read this in Contemporary-thon. You guys know that I loved it. It was great. It was very similar to other books that I've talked about where it deals with grief and romance and relationships and coming of age. I gave all my thoughts in the Contemporary-thon vlog about this, like, a lot, so thoughts will be there, but I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Another book that you should refer back to that vlog over was On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. I read this right at the end of Contemporary-thon, so if like you scroll to the very end where I talk about all of these books, that's what I'm talking about. I give kind of a mini wrap-up at the end of that vlog. I adored this. Angie Thomas is a voice that the YA community needs desperately, and I'm so happy that she is here, and she is bringing it with book 2 just as strong as she brought it with book 1, so thoughts will be in that vlog. I gave it 4 stars though. It was great. The next book that I finally got around to, I'm pretty sure everyone read this in January but me, but I finally read The Wicked King by Holly Black. I gave this 5 stars, so we're in the 5-star range of this video now. This is book 2. I can't really talk about it without spoiling book 1, but that ending though, Mother Trucker. Okay, moving on. The next book that I want to talk about is a book that I listened to, which was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This I read for Blackathon because it was like the group book for that readathon, but I also mixed it in with Contemporary-athon. It was a whole thing. This book is beautiful. I'm so glad that I listened to this in addition to listening to On the Come Up and to Slam, because it's about Black voices in the slam poetry community, and it was just, whew, it was so good. If you guys haven't read it, I highly recommend listening to it, because the audiobook, like, it's written in verse, so you're hearing it like slam poetry. So it's really impactful with all of the lines and how they're delivered, and ooh, I wrote down a lot of quotes from that book. Some of my favorite quotes of the year are coming from this book, so I gave it 5 stars. It was great. It was great. Big fan. The next 2 books I'm gonna lump together just because they're graphic novels, and I gave both of them 5 stars. And one is Heartstopper. Again, this I read during Contemporary-thon, so you can hear my thoughts about this, but this is basically the cutest male nerdy romance ever. Like, oh my god. Alice Oseman knows how to write YA contemporary that is so real. So basically this entire book is just like the most adorable blossoming of a romance between these 2 guys in school. It's precious. I smiled like an idiot the entire time I was reading it. And then I'm also going to talk about The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill, which we got in our Owl Crate, and I have been wanting to read this for like a year now. This is another book that I grinned like an idiot the entire time that I was reading it. It is so cute. It's basically about this girl who starts to work at a tea shop where they harvest all of the leaves for tea from the horns of dragons. Like, each dragon makes a different type of tea leaf. It also like opened up the conversation of like friendship and being new in a town and romance slightly and French. It was just, everything about this is just wholesome and precious. So I'm putting these two together just because they're graphic novels. They are in the same exact rating line in my head that is 5 stars. So both of these, if you're looking for books that will make you smile, these two are it. And then the last book that I have to talk to you guys about is my favorite book of the month. It's possibly going to be one of my favorite books of the year. As of right now, it's sitting in slot number 1 of 2019 releases that are amazing. And that is The Weight of the Stars by Kay Ancrum. I think I'm going to do an entire solitary review of this book just because I haven't really formulated my thoughts to a coherent review at this point. Just know that this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. I sobbed through the last quarter of the book, like ugly cried through the end of it. And it was just so touching. Kay Ancrum just writes characters and relationships and scenes that just like speak to me. Okay, her books are stunning. I can't wait for you guys to read this. It comes out in March. Get your hands on a copy of this. Even if you didn't like The Wicker King, I think you might like this one because it's not as toxic and hard to read. This one just reads like a normal contemporary. Like it flows. It doesn't read like the craziness that was The Wicker King. So if that's deterring you, maybe still give it a shot and see if you can pick it up. This was my favorite book of the month. One of my favorite books of the year, and I'm saying that very early on in the year, but I'm pretty sure this is going to stay at least in the top 5 of everything that I read. It's good. Okay, I've said it's good like a bajillion times. You guys get it. It's real good. It was the top of my list. It was my favorite book of the month. Read it. So that is going to be it for my wrap up for February. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite books of the month were. Like what did you read? How many did you read? I'm curious. I read a lot. I know that. Like I read a lot more than most people, but I'm just curious what people are reading right now. So let me know down in the comments. Make sure you hit the subscribe button because I think I'm gonna keep doing these. I might start doing mid-month wrap-ups just to like ease the filming process a little bit. So we'll see how that goes. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this and I'll see you guys in my next video.